great Odin's raven.
I feel the need for speed.
Ow! Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
Hey, where did you get those clothes? At the toilet store?
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 from the new season of Mattyice and the Chief. Chief, what's going on, bud?
Oh, nothing much. Just another day.
Just
in the glorious city of Fayetteville.
Just another day on the hill. Well, you know what? It's basketball season. We're going to talk basketball because we're right in the big thick of things in the NCAA. It's that time of the year almost. We're almost to one of my favorite parts of the year. As much as I don't like basketball, I love March Madness.
That's because it's like the greatest. To me, personally, it's the best time of the year because here's what you got going on in March. You got
nothing.
Draft prep for NFL.
True, yeah.
Because once you get done with March Madness, you're like 3 weeks away from the draft.
Yep.
And you've already had the combine and stuff, which starts this week. Starts technically today.
That's true.
Spring training is wrapping up.
Yeah, wow.
And so Major League Baseball official season starts soon after that. Plus,
some of us like that, some of us don't.
You're in the middle of some good NBA. Best time of the year for me.
You know, I think the NFL draft this year is at the end of April, right? April 30th,
yes.
I believe, is the date. Moved up a week. I wish they would move it back up farther. I love you.
They shouldn't have messed with it. They should have left it when it was.
Yeah, if you've listened to the show at all, you know me and Patrick are both big fans of the draft, and so we're both looking forward to that. But yeah, look, college basketball is right getting to that point. You're at the end of conference season. It's about time for conference tournaments, and then of course Selection Sunday and March Madness. So we're gonna talk some college basketball here in a little bit. But first, Patrick, let's start with it's not your favorite league, but it's close to your favorite league. You do love the NBA.
I do love the NBA, you're right.
You love the NBA, and this last weekend we had All-Star Weekend, which we're going to talk about a little bit there anyways. But let's start off with just kind of talking standings, talking teams. I'm going to ask you if you have any surprises. Actually, let's start there. Do you have any surprises so far for the NBA season?
Surprises? Overall, in general, going from the start of the year, I did not think that Atlanta would be number one team. Mm-hmm. Usually they're like that 7th, 8th seed who sneaks up on you and gets into the playoffs. This year, that's Miami. The Miami Heat, who were in the finals last year, is barely sneaking up in the Eastern Conference and getting that last spot. And it's not even like a landslide for the last spot. They're fighting with Brooklyn and Boston for the last spot.
And throw Charlotte in there too, because they're all right around that same.
Exactly.
And Detroit and Indiana. I mean, they're all they're 3 games apart right there. For that 7th and 8th spot. But Atlanta.
It's surprising, but oh my gosh, Atlanta's so good.
It's the bottom. Look, the East is terrible. If we're honest, the East outside of Atlanta. Outside of Atlanta, Toronto, and Chicago, and you could maybe throw Cleveland and Washington in there too, I guess. But outside of those 5 teams, the East is awful.
Oh, it's so bad, and it's like that every year, though.
It is, and I think, I think it is surprising that both Atlanta and Toronto are your 1 and 2 teams in the East. But at the same time, it's not super surprising because it is the East. As bad as mean as that sounds. That sounds kind of mean to say, but I think when you look at the standings, you're like, nah, it's the East.
You get what you get.
What are you gonna do? So I thought, I'll say what you will. I think, Atlanta being as good as they have been, not that because they've been a good team the last couple of years. but to be as good, I mean, they're 25-3 on the road, at home, 18-8 on the road. That's not great, but no one in the NBA is good on the road, so that's not super surprising. But that's a lot better team than I think a lot of people thought coming in, and so we'll see if that holds up. Like I said, we are just at the All-Star break, so we still got a little bit to go.
My favorite part of the East is that you have at the bottom of the teams that are obviously lottery picks. You have a list of teams who it's quite obvious they're tanking. And let's take New York, for example. They bought out Amari Stoudemire's contract a few days ago, which he just signed with Dallas.
Ooh, that could be a good pickup for them, though.
Oh, it's solid.
Having Amari probably come off the bench and give you some good minutes late in the game. That's a good pickup for Dallas.
And 2, they shut down Carmelo for the rest of the year, which here's what makes it obvious that they're tanking. He played 30 minutes in the All-Star game, but then he's going to sit out the rest of the year, and he's going to have surgery. Well, but you can sit there and play for 30 minutes in the All-Star game. Granted, he didn't give a lot of effort running down the court.
I'd say All-Star
game. But if you can play in the All-Star game, in a game that obviously doesn't matter, then you can play in the rest of the season, which still doesn't matter. But
it's probably smart on their part. I mean, they're in a, as weird as it sounds, they're in a bit of a battle with Philadelphia as to who's going to be the worst team in the NBA and get hopefully that first pick. Well, which that's what I think is funny about it, is that you're still not guaranteed to get the first pick. Like,
exactly.
I think that's what's so interesting to me about the NBA and tanking, because teams do it every year, and you're just like,
I hate it.
I don't know. I kind of like the lottery in that I think it keeps teams from tanking as badly.
Because it keeps them honest at the same time.
But look, they're terrible, and that's awful basketball. And I honestly think that a team that we're going to talk about a little bit later when we talk college basketball might be able to beat them this year. And actually, it might not be close. But let's go over to the Western Conference, where our team, the Memphis Grizzlies, are sitting high and mighty at number 2, 4 games back of the Golden State Warriors, who that's not surprising at all. Golden State being number 1 is not surprising at all. I think outside of Memphis, outside of the Memphis fan base, Memphis being number 2 surprises people. But I think people who have watched Memphis over the last 5, 6, 7 years aren't really super surprised by that.
No. Memphis would have been in that 3-4 range last year, but they had a lot of injuries that held them back. And so a lot of people who watched the Memphis team even last year and compared it to this year are surprised that they're number 2. But if they were as healthy as they've been all year this year, if they could have had that team last year, they would have made the same noise and contended better for a championship. Here's what I'm going to say with Golden State, and I know that I don't know if I mentioned this last week. I don't think we mentioned even any NBA talk last week. I don't think we
talked NBA last time.
Okay, that's good because I'm not repeating myself.
Fair enough.
Even though Charles Barkley has said some dumb things in the past week, considering his analytics talk and about Houston and whatnot, he said something that was probably one of the smartest things I ever heard talking about NBA basketball. Golden State is a team that if you watch, they're obviously jump shooters. They shoot a lot of threes, shoot a mid-range. They don't play a lot down low. They do have guys like David Lee who are great down low, but their specialty is jump shooting. And I compare Golden State to Peyton Manning in a sense that jump shooting can only get you so far.
Yeah.
Jump shooting can get you this number 1 spot and can get you high seeding for the playoffs, but it's not going to win you a championship. You got to be able to post up and play down low and to draw fouls under the basket in order to win those tough games. And Golden State, I don't think is going to be able to do that in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, and maybe to kind of add to it / have a little bit of a different approach to it, I think with jump shooting, if you're a jump shooting team, if you live, and they essentially live and die by the three-pointer, essentially live and die by the mid-range jumper. I think once you get farther along in the season, your legs are going to get tired, and not even necessarily like, oh, you can't play 40 minutes every game, but just that much over the course of time, it's going to average out and you're going to shoot. And despite the fact that Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are both out of this world shooters, you're essentially a streaky team. If you're a shooter, no matter you're a streaky guy. Whether your streak is I still shoot 43%, or whether it's one night I shoot 58%, the next night I shoot 23%, you're still going to be a bit of a streaky shooter, and that's not something I think you can bank on in the NBA playoffs, especially. Now, I'm going to ask you this question, and then we may mention something else in NBA stuff before we go on and talk college basketball. But let me ask you now, who's your favorite to win the East? Who's your favorite to win the West?
My favorite to win the East is Atlanta.
Okay.
Just because they have, not only do they have the starters and the stars to compete with anyone else, but they have the depth and the role players that they've had for a while and they've developed for a while to, in a sense, beat out those like a Toronto or Washington, even in those grinding third, early fourth quarters. Like they have role players like your Dennis Schroeder. They have guys like a Kyle Korver. They have the Paul Millsap, who's going to be healthy. I don't think he played much in the playoffs last year, which hurt them. But they have those guys. Also, an emerging Jeff Teague, who is going to be able to, I believe, just destroy the Eastern Conference. I don't think it's going to be that close. Maybe if they match up with the Chicago, it may be tough for them. But other than that, I don't see much of a contest. Western Conference, I think it's going to come down to maybe either Houston or Memphis.
Okay.
Just because Houston, they've made so many off-season moves and middle-of-season moves to add depth to their lineup. What helps Memphis' case is the fact that Dwight Howard has gone down.
Yeah.
He'll be ready for playoffs, but you don't know how well those knees are going to be by that time.
And he's a little bit of a streaky guy, too.
He's really, really streaky.
And missing a good portion of the season could hurt him a lot.
Playoffs, he's really not. He has certain moments, but for the most playoffs is whenever he struggles the most. And you see where Memphis, when it comes to playoff mode, that's when they're grinding and gritting the most. Like, that's when they're getting down, playing those dirty plays. Not necessarily like foul plays.
Yeah,
but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no.
They're getting down and doing the work that most players don't want to do. That's when they thrive most. So I don't want to be a homer because I know when we talked about this last year, we didn't mention Memphis even to begin with, even though I believe they were an 8th seed.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to come down to Atlanta and Memphis. I feel like.
I think you're almost 100% right. The East is kind of as good as Atlanta is. I'm still not necessarily sold on them. I know it sounds bad. I can grant it, I just haven't watched a lot of Atlanta basketball. If I'm 100% honest, I'm not saying they're bad or they're not going to be really good. I think in the East, even with Cleveland not being as good as a lot of people may have thought they were going to be, I think that's always a danger because as much as people want to hate on LeBron come playoff time, they still have a chance to beat any. I think they're still a good enough team that they could beat anybody on any night. And in a 7-game series, but if you throw LeBron into it, who knows? I do think Atlanta's the favorite there. I think they're probably going to pull out the East. Toronto, I don't have a good feeling about it. I don't have a good feeling about Toronto. Like sometimes you look at a team you just have a good feeling about. Anyways, I don't have a good feeling about Toronto. Western Conference, this is going to sound like we're really homers today, but I'm also going to say Memphis, and the reason why. Memphis defensively is the best team in the league by almost a full point a game, which everybody's kind of in that, 90. Most teams are in that 97 to 100 range of points allowed. Memphis is at 95.7 per game. I agree with you. They play really they play really good defense. They play that dirty, again, almost more of an 90s style of basketball where, they're going to get in there and play defense. And I think they're a team that does it so often and that does it throughout the season. So unlike some of these teams, you look at teams over the last couple of years who people are like, oh, they're good defensively. They're especially when it comes to playoff time. The difference between Memphis and all those other teams is Memphis doesn't have to turn it on. You don't have to worry about Memphis not showing up defensively. Now, are there some questions offensively some nights? Yeah.
Yes.
But that hasn't been as much of an issue this year. And you mentioned health, and I think that's been a big part of Memphis' success this year, and I think that's going to be a big part come playoff time. But the fact that they already have that defense established, and it's what they rely on to begin with, I think positions them to be the favorite out of the West because I think they can match up with Golden State, and if they can force a team like Golden State to play a little dirtier style of basketball, you open up the chance to grit out a win as they like to do.
Plus Memphis is adding depth at in any chance that they get.
Yeah,
the bench looks so much stronger this year compared to last year.
Yeah, I think they've done a good job building up that franchise and really as you said, building depth on that team and giving them a chance to not only be successful, but to be successful if they lose, a guy here and a guy there, they can plug a guy in. And I think that's why you're seeing Memphis. I think Memphis is one of those teams that over the last couple of years, despite not really having a big name guy, I mean, you can say Marc Gasol, but really not having a big name superstar, has really done a good job just staying really consistent. And I think that bodes well. And they've got some experience on that roster, and I think they got a good chance of making a deep run this year. So there it is. Those are our favorites. Now, real quick, before we move on, I want to ask you something because, admittedly, I'm not nearly as big of an NBA fan as you. And for those people who have listened to the show, they kind of know that. Now, is it just me, or does this season seem a lot more boring than other seasons?
Honestly, I would say no.
No.
I wouldn't say that it was. Just because last year, the way that the teams were set up last year, you had 5 or 6 teams that had your big threes, whatever you want to call it, and whatnot, to where if you watch those mid-tier teams, maybe your 7th, 8th seeds, and maybe even your teams are just out of it, it was the worst basketball you'd ever seen. But the way teams are set up now, it's getting to where it's not as top-heavy.
A little bit more parity.
League and teams are getting more evenly matched to where if you're watching maybe a Brooklyn, let's say maybe a Brooklyn-New Orleans game, that's a really good game. Maybe even a Utah playing an Indiana team. Mm-hmm. Both of those are sub 500, but it's an interesting matchup, and it's still good basketball to where last year you had so many teams that were down low, and the teams that were up towards the top were so far behind that those matchups were no contest.
Well, let me rephrase it this way, because maybe the basketball is better, and that's that. But let me ask it this way. Is it a little bit more boring because there's not as big of a villain this year? You know what I mean? Because last year, especially with and all the years with LeBron, I feel like there's not as much LeBron hate as there has been in past years. And I don't know if that's because Cleveland's not as good as as they were at Miami, but because this is my thing, and we were talking about it because you and me both watched the Rugby Sevens tournament this weekend in Vegas. We weren't actually in Vegas. I wish we were, but we were watching it on TV.
We did watch.
And I got thinking about that, and in terms of. Because I think rugby is kind of the next big sport. I think soccer and rugby are going to slowly continue to overtake, sadly for you, baseball and basketball. I think in terms of popularity.
Look,
that's down the road. But I think it's up there.
Watch my sports, but the fact that there are other people, including you, saying that soccer and rugby are going to be able to compete against other sports doesn't hurt me at all. It makes me excited. They're going to project it to be that big here.
Well,
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
And we'll say this as a show endorsement. Watch some sevens rugby. Watch some 15s rugby if you get a chance. 15s isn't as exciting as sevens rugby, but I say that because I think you look at a sport like that, and granted, we don't have a pro league here, so it's more of an international sort of thing. But I think internationally now, granted, it's probably one of my favorite teams. And sorry if I have some South African friends, and so sorry if this kind of upsets them a little bit. I don't know if any of them are listening, but I think that while I respect the crap out of New Zealand and the All Blacks, their rugby team, both sevens and 15, both of them are some of the best in the world at rugby. I think everybody kind of having that one team that you respect them, but you really really want to beat them. You absolutely they're not so villainous and then you're like, oh, look at those dirty turds. But they're so good that you just want to beat them. I don't think that there's that in the NBA, and especially not in Major League Baseball right now, because the Yankees and the Red Sox were both not that great last year. And so I guess this is what I'm asking. Are sports better off having a villain than just having good athletic competition?
Yes, and I'd say 80% of that's true. For the most part, yeah.
Because you look at the NFL.
Think of when you think of the NFL. When you think of the NFL, for example, for me personally, if you think of a villain, I think
Patriots.
New England, and how bad I would want Indianapolis to beat New England.
Yeah,
and how every other team to beat New England
or the Seahawks, because everybody hates the Seahawks.
Baseball, when I think of I don't think of a villain.
Well, a lot of people do.
I want Indy to beat every team, but they're not really a villain to me. When I think of baseball, I want everyone to beat the crap out of Boston or beat the crap out of New York.
The Yankees,
and even
not
Chicago,
the Mets.
Because they don't Chicago. The Mets, they're the Mets.
No one cares about the Mets.
That's what's sorry. But those three teams are villains to me, and I will watch those games just because I want to see whoever they're playing against just destroy them.
Thank you. That's what I was hoping that we would kind of get to, because this is the way I think about it. Now, granted, you mentioned that you enjoy watching games, like Indiana and New Orleans, because even though those are sub 500 teams, that's good basketball. But I was thinking about it from the casual fan sort of perspective. That I'm not, if it's not a Memphis game, I'm probably not going to watch it if it's NBA, because there's nothing that's. But I was thinking about that. I've noticed over the last couple of years, and I used to not be a big NFL fan, and I've over the last 6 or 7 years, really gotten into it. And I think it's that there are villains, there are teams that you will watch no matter what, even if you don't like the team. And I think that's kind of what the Bulls did back in the day. The Knicks, even kind of in that late 90s sort of era. The Bulls, the Knicks, the Pacers. You look at even the Showtime Lakers of the 90s, not the 80s ones. So we're not going back that far. But you look at those teams, and people would just watch them because of those teams. Even if you were a Philadelphia fan, of course you had Allen Iverson to watch then. But if you were a Philadelphia fan, you were watching Chicago versus Indiana, even if you didn't like them. And I think that's what the NBA is missing right now. I think to the casual fan, and baseball too, to the same point, I think both of those sports are missing a villain that brings the casual fan into the game.
And whenever you put it that way, I completely agree, because for the casual fan, especially for those who were LeBron haters, kind of like myself, they watched the Heat game when it came on just so that way they could watch Miami lose, which didn't happen often.
Even though LeBron might go 18 for 21, you would laugh at those three shots.
They were wanting that other team to beat Miami, and that's why they watched. You can even go as far back as LeBron's first time in Cleveland.
Oh yeah,
a lot of people wanted whoever was playing the Cavs at that time to beat them because of the fact they didn't like LeBron even then.
If it was
I was part of them too.
If it was then Charlotte Bobcats, you would still watch it because
exactly because you wanted that rare upset to happen. But now, I think what happened when the NBA didn't have a villain was whenever LeBron admitted that this season wasn't going to be as successful as everyone thinks it would.
Yeah.
Even with him being there. And then whenever it started playing out that way, even early on, it was like, well, he was right. It's not going to be a championship right now in Cleveland. And so everyone's just standing there like,
okay,
who do we watch now? Who do we even...
Okay.
Yeah. So...
No, I agree.
At this point, it's like, who do I watch now? I don't know who to hate.
Exactly.
And it helps when there's a single player that sticks out to you.
Mm-hmm. Either a single player, or it works with the team too, but because I know a lot of people hate on the Spurs just because they're old. But no,
for me, I'll go baseball. For me, whenever Nigel Morgan was still in baseball, I cannot stand Nigel Morgan. And so I hated the Brewers with a passion. And so I would love to watch Nigel Morgan strike out all the time.
Patrick Halley with one of the most random hates of anybody.
Oh, Nigel Morgan.
It's funny because it's not like Nigel Morgan's ever been one of the best players of all time.
Now it's Bryce Harper, but it's definitely not as strong as for Nigel Morgan.
The hate isn't nearly as strong as you with Bryce Harper.
It's really not. Bryce Harper can turn my hate around real quick.
No,
I'll never be able to like him ever.
Yeah, no, I think there are certain sports, and I think basketball and baseball are two of the biggest examples of sports that need villains. Whereas I think there are other sports that don't necessarily need villains as badly as those do. But hey, look, let's take a break. We're gonna take a break and come back and we'll talk some college basketball. So stick around. We'll be right back. All right, guys, we're back, and now it's time to switch gears a little bit. We're not going to switch too much. We're going to stay in basketball. Let's move to the college game because, as we've already mentioned, it is getting close to that March time of the year. And so let's take a look at some of these teams. And let me just ask you, Patrick, right off the bat, kind of the same thing that we did with the NBA. Is there any team right now that's really surprising you? Maybe they're in the top 25, or maybe they're just in the top 10 that you didn't think would be there. What teams are surprising you so far this year?
Let's see. Kansas, even though I'm a Kansas fan, just Kansas surprises me just because of the fact that you look at their roster and it doesn't jump out to you as much as previous Kansas teams have, and the fact that they're 21-4 is a big surprise. I mean, they just lost to West Virginia the other night, but still a big surprise. A Utah, number 9, giant surprise. Northern Iowa at number 11. I mean, who would have thought Northern Iowa would be even in the top 25, much less number 11?
Top 25, yes, but not number 11. Northern Iowa's been good the last couple of years, and so that's not a super big surprise for me at least. But then, I find that with basketball, I don't pay nearly as much attention to the big schools as I do the little schools, so to speak. I mean, Northern Iowa is in the Missouri Valley Conference, and that's kind of always a fun conference to keep an eye on, right? Because there's usually a really good team in that one. They've lost a couple. Now, granted, the games they lost to Evansville, which is kind of surprising. Lost to VCU in double overtime, which isn't super surprising. But a team that's beat Wichita State already this year. They finished up the season against Wichita State. They're an interesting team. I think they're one of those teams that'll probably get a lower seed, but they'll manage to make a decent run in the tournament. Other than that, I mean, SMU is about where you would kind of expect them right now.
Right. They're a good team. I got to watch them play against Tulsa at Tulsa a couple weeks ago, and they're a real solid team.
Yeah, you look at the coaches poll. Coaches poll is a little bit different. I mean, Wichita State's still up there, which you expect. They got some teams. Oklahoma State, which I don't know how good they are. Ohio State, I don't know how good they are. They've got San Diego State sneaking up into the top 25, which, again, if you follow some of the smaller schools, isn't a super surprise. Let me ask.
At 24 is kind of a surprise.
Who at 24? What did you say?
Ohio State.
Oh, Ohio State, yeah. 24 in AP, 23 in the coaches poll. They just don't really scream out that they're a great team. I feel like they'll probably lose in the first round, I think, this year, possibly. Let me ask you this. We've got some good teams. We'll go over the top 5, top 10 real quick. We'll just read them off. You got Kentucky, obviously, number 1. Virginia 2, Gonzaga 3, Duke 4, Wisconsin 5, Villanova, I almost said Valonia. That's in Arkansas. Villanova at number 6, Arizona at number 7, Kansas 8, Utah 9, Notre Dame 10. Now, let me ask you this. Is this finally the year that Gonzaga gets a number 1 seed? Because, look, I've been a Gonzaga guy since the Dan Dickau era. So that's going way back. That's like 1998, I think. Is Dan Dickau was there? That's a real good name for you. I think he played for the first Charlotte Hornets, if I remember right. Before the Adam Morrison era, because if you've seen a picture of him lately, that's something you want to forget. Look
up him with the freaking New York Nets. Oh my god! He looks like he should be leading a cult.
He looks like he's either leading a cult or he's gonna audition for Dracula the musical or something. So
better, he knows where to get the good shrooms.
Yeah. So Gonzaga, is this the year they get a number 1 seed?
They deserve one. In my opinion, they deserve one. But as far as the committee, I think they're going to need a little bit of help with Duke and maybe Wisconsin, maybe losing a game or two, because I think the committee is going to be very, very, I don't know what the word was, the right word to choose. They're going to be really
apprehensive.
Hesitant. Yes, they're going to be really apprehensive with choosing a smaller school like a Gonzaga as a number 1 seed. Kind of like how they were with Wichita State last year. But I think this Gonzaga team could have beaten the Wichita State team of last year.
Yeah.
So, I think Gonzaga absolutely deserves a number 1 seed.
I think this year they probably have the best chance that they've had in a while. And I think part of it is because you got Virginia and Duke are number 2 and number 4 respectively. And obviously one of them is going to win the ACC and the other one's not. And so that's I think that gives them a better chance. Will Wisconsin win the Big Ten? That's a big question. That's a tough conference tournament to win. And so I think, Villanova could sneak up there and get it, but Gonzaga's not losing probably the rest of the regular season for sure, and probably not in the tournament. And they've still got to play BYU twice. They've still got to play St. Mary's once, but neither one of those teams are as good as they've been the last couple years. And I don't think there's a team in that conference that's going to be able to beat them in the conference tournament. So I think, you're looking at what, they're 26-1 right now. They've got, let's see, hang on, I got to count. One. Oh, wait, they only have to play BYU once. I take that back.
Maybe in the tournament.
Yeah, maybe in the tournament. They've got 4 games left, so they're probably going to be 30-1 entering the tournament.
Look at that one loss. That one loss was against the number 3 at the time, Arizona.
In overtime.
Lost by only 3.
I don't want to say this isn't your mama's Gonzaga team, because Gonzaga's been good for a long time. They've been kind of a Peyton Manning-esque team in the sense that they're really good in the regular season. Obviously, they play in a much weaker conference, but there's a team that's been good for many, many years. Mark Few, what he's done with that program is just ridiculous for such a small school out of Spokane, Washington. I think what you're going to see, and I think this is going to play a big part of it too, is that the 1 seed in the West is going to be playing in Seattle. Which, granted, that's across the state, but that's a home game for them, and you know how that usually is. I'm looking at bracketology right now. Kentucky is going to be a 1 seed. They're in Louisville in the Midwest. Virginia in the East, that's in Charlotte. Duke in the South, that's Charlotte, assuming they get it. And so Gonzaga is your best West Coast team right now. I think outside of Arizona, and Arizona's not going to be a 1 seed unless Gonzaga loses and Arizona runs the table. So I think this year sets up for Gonzaga to be a number 1 seed, finally. And so finally I won't feel bad putting them in the Final Four / winning the championship like I do pretty much every year. Pretty much every year my bracket looks like Gonzaga championship, Florida championship. If Arkansas hadn't been in the tournament, I've never put Arkansas in the championship, even though mainly because they're never in it. But
they will this year.
But they will this year.
Chance.
And that's a good segue because I do want to talk, and you may get to go watch this team here in a little bit, but you have seen this team live once or twice.
I have, a couple times.
Now, they're 18 overall, 18th in the nation right now, at 20-5. Do you see that as them being underrated or overrated? Because I know, or is that just right? Because I know it's kind of been a tough couple weeks in the Arkansas fan base because you had, people saying, oh, this team's not any good. And then all of a sudden, oh, this team's really, really good. And this team's not going to make the tournament. This team's going to make the Sweet 16, Elite 8. The team's 20-5. What is this team?
I think there were times when they were ranked that they were overrated because you saw where whoever makes the rankings, they desperately wanted Arkansas to be top 25. And so there were weeks where they were in it on Monday, and then they lost a game that they shouldn't have lost that week, and so they had to get bumped out. And as soon as they won a good game, the very next Monday they were right back in it at like 24, 23. And so the ranking system obviously wants Arkansas to be in there, and so but they're playing the right basketball at the right time right now.
Yeah.
So they've been moving up. They had a big win against Ole Miss on the road. They had a very big win against Auburn on the road this past week. Playing Missouri tonight, which
shouldn't be a contest. Oh, we may have lost Patrick. So, hang on, Patrick, because I think we just lost you for a second, and you may be back. Are you back?
I'm back.
Okay, you were saying they're playing Missouri. Missouri shouldn't be a competition tonight.
I want to say their biggest contest for the rest of the year is against a Kentucky team on the road, which is going to be tough.
Well,
but
that's a game, though, that they're not expected to win.
Last year they beat Kentucky on the road and at home.
Yeah.
They only beat Kentucky on the road, but I feel like if any team's going to beat Kentucky this year, especially in the SEC, it's going to be Arkansas.
Yeah, I think that's you look at the rest of their schedule. They got Missouri tonight. They should win that game. You will probably know that by the time this show actually airs. Mississippi State, they got to go on the road to Mississippi State. Got to go. They play at Bud Walton against Texas A&M. They go on the road to Kentucky, on the road to South Carolina, and then LSU comes up and plays them. So I look, conceivably, they could go 5-1 the rest of the season.
I'd say 2 because the LSU game, even though LSU is at home, I think that's going to be a tough one too.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
They're going to lose, but I'd say I'd be happy with 4-2 for the rest of the year.
Either way, I think it's kind of hard. It's been funny if you listening to the Razorback fan base and how they've kind of complained, and even when this team was like 18-4 or 18-5, complaining about this team. And
up here, it's been the dumbest stuff. Like, we get by a squeaker. Granted, it was against maybe a team like in Alabama where we should have beat them more than what we did, but we still won.
Yeah.
And they were wanting Anderson's head on a silver platter because of the fact we didn't beat them by more than we did.
Yeah,
happy that we won.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because I think the Razorback fan base has been really frustrated with this basketball team for really since Nolan left. Everybody, because I think that's the thing. Everybody's like, well, when Nolan was here, and Nolan this and Nolan that. Well, first off, Nolan ain't here, and he's not going to be here, so get that out of your systems. They're not going to be the same basketball team they were then. But I think you look at this, and if it was any other fan base, I think, and this is going to sound like I'm really hating on Razorback fans here, but if this was any other fan base, they would be more than happy with this team. I mean, look, they lost to Tennessee, they lost to Ole Miss at home, which, those are probably games they should have won. They should have maybe won. They lose to Clemson on the road, they lose to Iowa State on the road. Okay, we'll give you those, whatever. You lose to Florida by 1 point, but for the most part, these close games. I mean, against Tennessee, they won a close one. Against Missouri, they won a close one. Against Alabama, they won a close one. Against Ole Miss, they just won a close one. These were games that I think last year and in previous years, Arkansas was losing, and
yes.
So to be winning these games, I think proves how much better of a team they are. Now, I think how far they go in the tournament is going to completely depend on how. Obviously, Portis plays, but how Qualls plays, and really, I think, what's his name? Beard. I think how he plays, how he shoots the rest of the year going out is going to determine how far of a run this team makes. But I think this is a team that not only gets into the tournament, which they're going to, they're a 6th seed right now. They should be fine unless they just lose every single game from here on out. Knock on wood. How far do you think this team can make a run?
Let's say, hypothetically, the bracket stays how it is right now. So they're in the Midwest. They would be matched up against either Illinois or UCLA, which they'd be either one of those. So I'm fine with that. Then they would play either William and Mary or Notre Dame. Let's say they play Notre Dame. I think they can move on to this. I think, honestly, they could probably move on to the Sweet 16, maybe even the Elite 8, just considering who they play. If they beat Notre Dame, they go up against the winner of, let's say, Kansas and Georgetown. I think if Kansas wins, they can beat this Kansas team. They're strong, but they're not as strong. So I think this is a Sweet 16 team, at least, I feel like.
Yeah, and obviously once you get to the tournament, it all depends on where the brackets fall and where you end up and what matchups you get into. But I think that, again, I think this is a team that they've got a dominant guy in Portis. They're not a great defensive team, but I think they're good enough at defense to really do some damage. And look, they're a matchup problem, I think. Now, they don't play the 40 minutes of hell that everybody thinks that they used to back in the day. They don't play that same way. But I do think that defensively they play enough of that style to really kind of be a matchup problem. And I think that they would kind of turn that up come tournament time a little bit more because it's harder to prepare for it. And especially if you got a team that you faced that played a day or two ago, you turn up the heat on them a little bit. And I think this team can do that. So I think realistically they're at least a Sweet 16 team and possibly could go farther. Obviously, again, it depends on how the brackets turn out. But I think they're up there in that top 15, top 16 teams in the country. Now, whether matchups work out right and they get that far, again, who knows? But I do think I think 18 to 15 is about right where they should be in terms of rank. I think they're right in the sweet spot of where they should be. I think that's actually a pretty good one.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one.
So there's that. Real quick, I'll just ask you, and we don't have to talk about it because we do have a couple people who are Arkansas State fans, and we kind of talked about this earlier. Do you think this is the final year of Brady at Arkansas State?
Yes, I mentioned this to you earlier. One thing that kind of, obviously the terrible record they have sparked it, but one thing that kind of made it clear that he's gone, I don't remember what game it was, but it was Troy. Now I remember it was the Troy game after they played Troy. There was some quotes that he made at the press conference afterwards, and he essentially said that he's lost control of his team.
Yeah, you don't want that.
When you say that, And when you take into account that he only recruits, I don't know when the last time a freshman came in. Cameron Golden, probably one of the only freshmen.
Wasn't Micah Downs a freshman?
Who?
Micah Downs, tall kid.
Kelvin,
yeah. What?
Kelvin, he was a freshman. I think Rakeem came in as a freshman, but he's gone now.
Yeah. He's just
guys come in as freshmen because there's only 3 or 4 guys on that roster who were there last year.
Yeah, I just think, and we got to go take a break. We got to take a break here. But yeah, I think you're probably right there. Terry, athletic director Terry Mahajer is not one to let guys sit in mediocrity. I don't think, and he's not a guy that Terry hired. So I think he's probably on a little bit of a shorter leash as it is. So I think you're probably right. He's not building. Essentially, he's not building anything with that basketball program, and that's a basketball program that, look, truthfully, you look at the eastern side of the state. You think of some of the people that have come from the eastern side of the state. And granted, this is mostly football, but Marcus Monk being one of them from the eastern side. There's a lot of good basketball talent in the eastern side of the state.
He played basketball. He played basketball.
Well, no, I know he played basketball, but I'm just saying there's a lot of good talent that comes from that eastern side of the state, that comes from the Memphis area. The Arkansas State, I think, should be a better program than they are. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets fired either. Look, there's some college basketball. I don't think we've talked college basketball in a long time, since the tournament last year. So, look, there's college basketball. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. We got some NFL stuff to talk about, so we'll see you then. And we're back for the last segment, and this time, because apparently I don't think we've ever done a show where we haven't talked at least a little football. So it's time to talk a little bit more football. Patrick, it's off season, but as you know, and as our listeners should know by now, this is still a very on period. Not a lot of off happening unless you're actually a player, and then even then there's not really a whole lot of off. We got some stuff that's happened, some rumors that are coming out. We're going to talk about a couple of those. Let's start, Patrick, with your team, the Indianapolis Colts, talking about maybe bringing in possibly a veteran running back.
I mean, I think this came out of nowhere. I think it actually just came up maybe even as early as today or yesterday, because I was watching NFL Live, I don't know, a couple days ago, and they were talking about how talks of bringing Frank Gore back with San Francisco were kind of heating up a little bit. It was kind of one of those things where he's going to have to take a pay cut, but they really want him back. Then all of a sudden, you hear rumors that Indianapolis is a front runner to sign Frank Gore. In my opinion, if they do that, one, it's obviously a quick fix because he's going to be 32, and running backs don't last long after you get through your 30s to begin with. Even though Frank Gore continues to be a power runner who thrives in the league. But having said that, he's not going to last long, probably 2 or 3 years. And on top of that, I also feel like they need to draft a running back either this season or next season, so that way they can kind of learn and be mentored by Frank Gore, so that way whenever Gore's gone, whoever they draft can take over.
Yeah, I think it would be a really good move for the Colts. You look at what Frank Gore did last year. 255 carries, over 1,000 yards, only 4 touchdowns. Part of that's just that team wasn't as good as what a lot of people thought it was going to be going into the season. That's a team that also, you got to think, started giving the ball to Carlos Hyde a lot more towards the end of the year. And he's looking like he's going to be kind of their running back of the future, possibly. There's some questions as to what really that team's going to be next year and in the next couple of years. And so I think, you got a new coach coming in there. Granted, he was with the team last year, but usually when that happens, you see some guys leave. You see some veterans leave. And I think Frank...
You're going to see Hyde get more carries than last year. And if he comes to Indianapolis, who is he going to share the ball with? Boom Heron? No.
Trent Richardson?
Nope. He's going to be gone, I feel like.
Yeah, I think he'll probably be gone.
And probably Bradshaw, especially after Bradshaw's marijuana arrest of a night or two ago. He may be gone as well.
Yeah.
So it's looking more like a good situation for Frank.
I think you bring in Frank Gore, and then, like you said, I think you go ahead and draft a running back this year. I think the class of running backs is actually a little deeper than it has been in the last couple of years. I can't think of a whole lot of guys off the top of my head that are in it. Obviously, you got Gurley, you got Melvin Gordon. Those guys you may not be able to get when you would like to get them. But there's some depth in
Abdullah. You could get
who's that
John
kid?
Miami.
Yeah, Duke Johnson. Who's that kid in Boise? And their kid coming out of Boise that's supposed to be pretty good. I can't think of his name.
Yeah, there is, but
needless to say, there's a lot of depth, I think, at running back in the draft this year. I think you go ahead and draft him. Frank Gore he's been a good every down back for several years. I think he's a guy that you can take and you can say, hey, look, teach this guy. You're going to be our running back for our top running back. And I think what you're going to see, if they're smart, if the Colts are smart, what they'll do is they'll draft a running back who they think is the future. And they'll do kind of what the Seahawks have been doing the last couple of years with Marshawn Lynch and Robert Turbin. And you saw Robert Turbin get a lot more carries this year, but Marshawn Lynch was still the back. And I think that's the way it should go with Frank Gore. I think you have a good chance if you do it that way. I think it's just a good move all the way around.
I do too. I hope it happens, but we'll see.
Especially
free agency, not one that you can predict. So
especially. I mean, and look, the guy ended the season with 200 yard. I mean, he had 158 against the Chargers, had 144 against the Cardinals. So I still think he's got gas in the tank. I don't think he's quite done yet. But and look, to add kind of to it, he's missed games during his career because of injuries. So is his body older? Yeah. But he's also not has had as many carries over his career maybe as some other guys have. He's got plenty of carries, don't get me wrong, but he's got 1,100 yards. He's got over 2,000 carries. Okay, he's got some yards on him, so we'll see. But I think that would be a good pick.
I do too. Or
pick up. Now, Patrick, kind of moving on. You and me had a little bit of maybe a disagreement, I think, would be... it wasn't like a big fight or argument or anything. We had a little bit of a disagreement maybe about something. And I'll tell you what brought this up. Let me set this up. I'm sitting eating some lovely, lovely Chinese food. I guarantee you no one from that restaurant is listening, but if they want to sponsor the show and pay Matt to come eat there every once in a while, I will say nice things about this restaurant every single day. It was that good. I was really happy. But I was watching it. They had ESPN on, and I'm watching an interview, and Jack Del Rio, new Raiders head coach, is on there. And he's talking about bringing a winning mentality to the Raiders. Now, you have to have that. I agree with him 100%. Patrick, this is a man. This is a man who doesn't have a winning record as a coach. How can we expect him to bring a winning mentality to a terrible organization when he comes from a terrible organization where he was a head coach?
First, here's why I think he can. Now, the past 1,000 hires that Oakland's had have definitely not turned out the way they've wanted to. But I do think this one will be better than the last 5 or 6, which strings back to probably 2009, which is sad. First, I think he probably did as good of a job as a lot of other NFL coaches could have done with that Jacksonville team. Granted, that team did not have the best players. It didn't have, let's just face it, they weren't good, but at the same time, after Del Rio left, they got a lot worse. But he didn't put that team together. I think now coaches have a say. Don't get me wrong; they have a big say of who comes to the team and who plays and who gets drafted and whatnot. But I don't know on the top of my head who the general manager was or who they were, because there's probably more than one, when Jack Del Rio was there. But whoever he/they were terrible GMs, because one of the only good things that they did, they got Byron Leftwich, who, don't get me wrong, is not a quality quarterback, but he wasn't that bad. He was definitely one of the best players on the team when he was there.
Yeah.
2, they got Maurice Jones-Drew, which at the time was a good running back. He's not anymore, but when he was there, especially earlier years when he was there, solid running back. Mercedes Lewis, first couple of years, solid tight end. Kind of your mid-tier tight end. Now he's just fallen off. Defensively, there has never really been anyone there to kind of hold up that defense, which honestly strengthens your case, because Del Rio is a defensive guy. So you would think there would be more defensive studs from his teams in Jacksonville than offensive studs.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to say he had taken them to the playoffs and even a championship game with that Jacksonville team. Plus, I think that his tenure in Denver allowed him to sit back and learn from better coaches, like a John Fox, who you could argue is not really that great of a coach.
Yeah,
but
I could.
I personally think that his tenure in Carolina proved that he was a solid coach. Do I think he deserved to get the Denver job? No. But that's where he went. He did well there. And I think he got to learn not only from John Fox and the others of the staff, but from John Elway, the front office, even some of the older players, and see how to coach certain players, how to put together a team, a winning team, and how to he kind of got to sit back for 2 or 3 years and just soak everything in a winning perspective. And so he's kind of got a blank canvas in Oakland, but he does have a quarterback who has a potential to be a star with Derek Carr. Mm-hmm. And he does have the pieces on defense, I feel like, to have a solid defense, because the pieces are there. He just has to – he's got to like kind of guide the sheep in a sense, because they're all there. He just got to put them where they need to be. The offense is what needs to be completely redone.
Yeah, okay. Here's where I stand on it. Now, I'll set this up. Jack Del Rio took over head coach of Jacksonville Jaguars in 2003. Was head coach till 2011. Okay, there's that. Now, I'm going to read you the coaches who were head coaches at the Oakland Raiders since then. We'll start off. Bill Callahan, Norv Turner, Art Shell, Lane Kiffin, Tom Cable, Hugh Jackson, Dennis Allen. And then you can throw in Tony Sperano. That's this year. Admittedly, there's a lot of terrible coaches in that list. I won't deny that. But here's my thing on this. And you're looking at a guy who at Jacksonville went 68-71 That's his career coaching record. He did take them to the playoffs twice. They lost to New England Patriots both times, once in the wild card, once in a divisional game. Now, in 2005, let's see. I'm trying to where did the roster go? I just had the roster up. Maybe I didn't. Well, first off, in 2005, the Genius drafted Matt Jones in the first round.
Blame the GM.
I blame the GM, but GMs take a lot from the coaches in that regard. I mean, if a coach doesn't have a guy highly rated, he's probably not going to take him. In 2007, when they had their other playoff year, they did have David Garrard was their starting quarterback. Maurice Jones-Drew, Fred Taylor were both on that roster at running back. And so, okay, my problem with it is this. You were at the team, let's see, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 8 years?
7, 8 years.
7, 8 years. You're with the team that long. Your first 2 playoff years are in season 3 and season 5. After that, you break 500 once. In an AFC South, which really isn't that good of a division. You look at...
Keep in mind, it's not great now,
but
was it then?
It had the Colts then, still. But really, the Texans have been average. The Titans have been average over that same period of time. So you have one strong team in that division is what I'm going to say. My problem with it is if you're the head coach that long, you should be developing some players that make that team decent. And let's be honest, Jacksonville has been kind of a laughingstock since 2000, probably since before 2003. But you're other than 2 years where you played really good football, you still finished second in the AFC South because of your Colts. Look, he's a guy that I don't think has a track record of developing a lot of talent. He's a guy who, he can maybe win if he's given talent. Maybe he can win if he has talent on that team. Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say how much of a difference he actually makes at Denver because of what Denver was before that. Because Denver's defense was fine before he came in. It was because he comes in post Tim Tebow when the defense was what everybody say was the strong point. Not the offense. And then obviously the offense goes on to win a lot of games after that. Not that the defense was bad, but I have a problem. I know he has to say that because that's what coaches are expected to say. But come on. You're going to sit here and tell me he's what's going to bring the winning mentality?
Here's another thing,
He's what's going to do it?
Look.
Hang on, before you say that, this goes back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago about guys continuing to get jobs as head coaches in the NFL who don't necessarily deserve it.
I agree. He may not deserve... Let me say this. I think if he's up for a head coaching job, the Raiders is what he deserves. He doesn't deserve any other job. That's what he deserves.
Fair enough.
If he's up for a head coaching job, he should deserve that one and that one only. Any other job, too high for him. But this is what I have to say. Granted, he does not have a winning record. Granted, he did not turn around the Jaguars. He didn't develop any solid players. He didn't consistently take them to a playoffs, didn't have a winning record consistently. I'd be an idiot to admit that because the stats prove otherwise. And I'd be ignorant. But the past Raiders teams have been so awful that if you put in Jack Del Rio, it doesn't matter what he does. They're obviously going to have a winning mentality because they can't get any worse.
So what you're saying is even mediocrity is a step up.
Yes.
Okay. As long
he can make them 8-8 every year, and they will be so happy.
Hey, you know what? If that's what you're saying, I can get behind that.
That is
so
a winning mentality.
Jack Del Rio. I will concede that point. Jack Del Rio is a step up from any coach any coach they've had in the last 10 years, and Fair enough. I'll give you that.
Thank you.
Fair enough. That point, while it doesn't disprove anything I'd said. I can agree with you on that at least. Look, let's move on real quick before we end this thing because we got to get out of here. But I do want to talk a little bit about some statements that were made earlier by Browns head coach Mike Mattyice talking about their quarterback situation, which is just awful.
There's always a quarterback situation in Cleveland.
There's never been
like, oh, this is the starter. We already know that.
I watched a real interesting. It's not really a documentary. I think it's just a fan made. I think it's called Only in Cleveland or something, and it's like a 25-minute video that's just shows what's gone on since the team left the NFL, or not left the NFL, but left to go to Baltimore, and then once they came back into the league. Mm-hmm. And if you get 24 minutes, it's really just it's an interesting watch, no longer than an episode of The Office or Community or Parks and Rec for those of you who watch shows like that. So just sneak it in there. It's fascinating to watch just to see the guys that have gone through there and the mistakes that have been made in that organization. Sorry to our friend Roger, who I know will feel just a twinge of sadness at hearing me say this, but it's nothing he wouldn't say about them themselves. What are their options? Because Mike Mattyice said that he's essentially going into free agency. He's going into the draft as if he doesn't have a starting quarterback. As we know, Johnny Manziel is, I guess, still in rehab right now. And so we're not really sure his status going forward. Oh, what are their options, Patrick?
Their options are to either...
Doesn't it just feel so depressing to talk about? Like, I'm not even a Browns fan, and it's just like, oh. Like, you kind of feel bad for him.
It is, in a sense that it's another year and they still can't find a starting quarterback.
Yeah.
But it's not in the sense that it's not surprising.
Yeah.
But I feel like they have one. They have one. They had Brian Hoyer, who did well in Cleveland compared to anyone else that's ever been there. I mean, come on. Derek Anderson was the last guy who brought them to the playoffs, and then the very next year they were like 4-12. But
yeah.
Brian Hoyer is, in my opinion, he's not elite by any means. He's not top 10, top 15, but he's a solid quarterback. He did very well last year, considering all the off-the-field issues that they had, considering the draft bust, quote-unquote, that they've had, especially this past year and other years prior. I don't see what's wrong with bringing him back. Let's look in the draft. You have Winston, who
you're not
arguably not going to be that good. Mariota, arguably in a system, which if you put him in the wrong system, he's going to be crap. Mm-hmm. So other than those two, you have guys who are kind of like maybe your A.J. McCarron and Aaron Murray.
Guys who are like your Brian Hoyers of the draft.
Basically, you have to just let them sit and learn for a while.
Yeah.
So, and then there's not guys in free agency. There's
you look at free agency.
Jake Walker, Mike Vick, those type of guys.
Yeah,
so,
you don't want to pick up Jake Locker because I think you just put yourself in another. You're going to have an injury and then you're going to be in the same situation. I think we kind of talked about Matt Moore is kind of a guy. He's the big name, so I put that in quotes because he's not really a big name.
Okay, let me stop right there. When you have a quarterback free agent class, when Matt Moore is your top guy to go after, that's when you have a cry for help.
Yeah. As bad as this is going to sound, I think really the only free agent that would do them much of any good is a guy who retired, and that's Kyle Orton. And I hate saying that, but Kyle Orton...
True. He did very well in Buffalo.
He's a good kind of bridge guy. I think he's a bridge starter, and he was a good guy. And he'd have been... But, too bad he retired. You look at... I just want to name off some of these... List off these names of starting quarterbacks. We'll start in 2004, and we'll go back. 2014... Brian Hoyer, Johnny Manziel, Connor Shaw. 13, Campbell, Brandon Whedon, Brian Hoyer. 12, Brandon Whedon, Thad Lewis. 11, Colt McCoy, Seneca Wallace. 10, Colt McCoy, Jake Delhomme, Seneca Wallace. 2009, Brady Quinn, Derek Anderson. Stop me when you hear a guy who's actually good. 2008, Derek Anderson, Brady Quinn, Ken Dorsey, Bruce Gradkowski. 2008, Derek Anderson, Charlie Fry. 2006, Charlie Fry, Derek Anderson. 2005, Trent Dilfer, Charlie Fry. 2004, Jeff Garcia, Kelly Holcomb, Luke McCown. 2013, Kelly Holcomb, Tim Couch. 2002, Tim Couch, Kelly Holcomb. 2001, Tim Couch. 2000, Doug Peterson, Tim Couch, and Spurgeon Wynn. 1999, Tim Couch, Ty Detmer.
I feel like you just need to stop right there because I'm never going to stop you. Because
that goes back to 1999, and that's when they came back into the league. Look, it's a wasteland. It's a wasteland for quarterbacks, and I think this is the thing. I think you have to sign. I think Brian Hoyer is the only guy that you can. I mean, sure, you could go after a guy like Mark Sanchez, but I don't think Mark Sanchez is a fit for that team. I think Mark Sanchez is a guy who he can be a decent quarterback, and we've seen him be a decent quarterback, but he's a guy that has to have a team built around him. Other than that, there's just really not anybody on the list of free agents that I would trust for a full season. And so I think you might as well stick with a guy who's familiar with the system, who's been on your team for a couple of years, and go with Brian Hoyer for another year, because you're not solving your quarterback problem in the draft this year. Because you're not going to outside of Mariota, and I know a lot of people don't like Mariota as much as I do. I think outside of Mariota, there's not a solid guy that I feel real comfortable with. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time watching Garrett Grayson. I haven't got deep into draft preparation mode yet. I'm still a little behind on that. And so a couple of these guys may be better than what I'm thinking, but you're going to tell me Brett Hundley is going to be your franchise quarterback? No. You're going to tell me right now Garrett Grayson or Bryce Petty is going to be your franchise quarterback? No. Those guys are answers, and there's not an answer in free agency. So I think you're smart to open up and look and see what you can get, but I think day one, unless Johnny Manziel's out of rehab and 100% and you feel confident, I think Brian Hoyer may be getting another round as a starter, unless they just don't re-sign him, and that's entirely possible because it's Cleveland.
It looks like they're not going to re-sign him, but at the same time,
they may be forced to.
I don't think it's a situation where they should be forced to, where it's like, oh, there's nothing else. I guess we're going to get to you like towards the end of the year. It's like that's anyone's best option. Why not go ahead and re-sign your best option, even if it's for a year or two? Like,
yeah,
you don't have to give him a max deal. You don't have to get him for 5-6 years. If you only want him 1-2 years, do it. But I feel like that's the best option right now for any team.
Yeah.
Why not go ahead and do it?
In 2014, his cap hit was $1.25 million. So it's not like that's way low for a backup quarterback even. I mean, Matt Moore as a backup was clearing 5.5. Josh McCown is whatever he was down in Tampa, terrible, 4.75. Jake Locker, granted he was a starter, was making $4 million. Mike Vick, backup technically / starter, $4 million. Kyle Orton was pulling in $4 million. Matt Hasselbeck, who was never expected to play down in Indianapolis last year, made $3.75 million. So Hoyer's cheap. He's been in your system. You might as well do it.
Just do it
because
it's the option. Because
again, you have no. I don't think you have any other options. I mean, look at those other guys. Mike Vick, 34. Matt Moore's 30. Josh McCown's 35. Jake Locker's 26, but he's injury prone. Hasselbeck's 39. Christian Ponder? You think he's going to be your answer? Blaine Gabbert? Is he going to be your answer? Sean Hill? Is he going to be your answer? I mean, you could bring in Jason Campbell because he's been there before, but you're no better off there. You're not going to get Tavares Jackson away from Seattle. Seattle will re-sign him. That leaves Brian Hoyer. Unless you want to take a flyer on a guy like Matt Flynn, who clearly has never been good enough to start because he lost his job everywhere he's been. And Ryan Mallett's the next guy on the list under Matt Flynn. So your options are small. You don't have any. Browns, Mike, listen to me. First off, hire me to pick out your quarterbacks from now on. But go ahead and sign Brian Hoyer because that's all you got. It's sad days for the Browns. Sorry, boys. Sorry, Roger. We know. Sorry. But that's your Browns for you. Patrick, I think it's time we wrap up the show. You got anything else before we head out?
Combine.
Ooh, Combine.
Technically, it starts today. The first group, which I think was basically special teamers, and O linemen, maybe tight ends, and I'm not quite sure. They reported today, basically they'll go through interviews and medical checks and whatnot. But I want to say Thursday starts the actual workouts and drills and all that kind of stuff.
Let me ask you this real quick, and this is what we'll end on real quick. Tell me what you think the most important drill is, or most important event or thing you do at the combine is, and tell me what you think is the most overrated.
What drill is the most overrated, or what play?
Drill. What sort of drill?
What drill? 40.
Yeah.
40 is overrated. Is it? I mean, it has an impact because of the fact that it does tell you a little bit how fast they are, how slow they are. But just because a guy runs a 4.6 doesn't mean that you shouldn't draft them.
Let me say this, because I follow a bunch of guys who are like draft like gurus, so to speak, on Twitter, and if you listen to the show, you probably do, because you're probably like us. Somebody was tweeting about that stuff yesterday, and I said this about it. Look, this is what the 40 is. In the 40, when you're running a 40-yard dash, you line up in a sprinter stance, and you run 40 yards in a straight line. Nobody on a football field lines up in a sprinter stance, first off. Second off, runs 40 yards in a perfectly straight line. I mean, yes, it tells you top end speed. Look, if I was a guy, if I was a scout, so NFL teams, if you're listening up for this, if you're listening to this show, any NFL teams, this is what you need. Pro days would be more important to me, and this is why. I would ask a guy, I'd say, look, if you're a defensive lineman, all I want you to do is run a 10-yard sprint. Mm-hmm. Get in your football stance, any position, I would say, start in whatever position you normally would be in. So if you're a quarterback, the way I would want to time you is, I would want you to do a 5-step drop, do a hitch step, and then take off. And that's what I want to time you on, because that's going to give me a realistic idea of what your speed is, as opposed to getting in the sprinter. Because no quarterback is ever going to run from a sprinter stance and take off. Because I think the only important part to me of a 40-yard dash is the first 10 yards. And that I really don't even care about outside of a defensive end. Because a defensive end is going to start in roughly that same sort of stance. Nobody else does. I'd rather see a cornerback line up and run backwards for 10 yards. I'd rather see how fast he is there. I could care less about a 40.
I think one of the most underrated drills in the combine is the cone drill.
Oh, absolutely. Cone drill and shuttle drills are the two big ones.
Yes, definitely shuttle.
And obviously the interview I think is the most important, because I've said this for years too, and we may have talked about it. We got to go, but I think the interview is important because honestly, if you can't tell from watching film what a guy's going to give you on a football field, you don't have any business drafting him. If you think he's going to be a third rounder, don't move him up to the first or second round based on combine, unless you talk to him in the interview and he says, "Yeah, I was actually injured, and I had like a torn quad or something for the last 3 games of the season. So if you watch film there, I look a lot slower." Like, then okay, maybe. But if you don't see a guy do something on film, the combine's not going to show you anything. And that's how I feel too about. And this is, we'll end it here. And this is, I said that already, but we're going to end it here. And that's the same way I feel. I've heard that a lot of the quarterbacks are planning on throwing at the combine. And I'm going to tell you this: if you're looking to draft a quarterback based on how they throw at the combine, you need to give up, because you need to get fired, because you throw completely differently when you're not wearing pads than you do when you're wearing pads and actually playing the game of football. And so, yeah, it gives you a little bit of a basis of accuracy and how deep you can throw a ball. But other than that, it's pretty much pointless. The combine in general, outside of getting actual size measurements, is probably, and doing the interviews, I think is a lot less pointless than, or a lot more pointless than people think it is. So, keyword to end the show: don't put a lot of stock in combines.
Don't.
Combine superstars do not equal NFL superstars.
You can put a little bit. I think most people put a lot of stock in the combine. This would be my last thing. Most people put a lot of stock in the combine because they've had 2 or 3 weeks without NFL. They're ready to perfect their team.
They just want to see something
and
happen.
So they have a guy or two that they want, and then they may see them slide or fall or maybe even rise. And so they put too much stock in that.
So don't put too much stock in the combine is what we're saying. But hey, I think it's been a good show. Patrick, make sure you're following him on Twitter at Patrick_Howie. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Matt_Sindelar. Of course, follow the show at MIATC show. And make sure you're following us on Facebook as well. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you guys soon.
No, Ron! My tummy's rumbling. It's scary. Tommy's got the tum-rums. In America, it's bling bling, but out here, it's bling bang, huh?
I already took what I call a wire shower. I rub my armpits with air fresheners. New car.
Oh yeah, I'm experimenting with some new entrepreneurial ideas. That one's called Sport for Thugs. Dress loud.